Hey everyone, welcome to the Stride to Freedom podcast. My name is Russell Benaroya, and I'm the co-founder of Stride Services, a virtual back-office bookkeeping and accounting firm serving hundreds of clients around the United States. This podcast is designed to help small business owners focus on growth and innovation. In other words, focus on those things that inspired you to start your business in the first place. We call it your genius zone. We do our job on this podcast when business owners feel like they have the trust and confidence to build the right team of partners around them that will help them grow. Thanks for joining. Let's go. Okay, hey everyone. Great to reconnect on this episode of Stride to Freedom. We have a really cool guest this week. Tod Fiscus is joining us from Transition 360. Hey, Tod.
Hey, Russell. Thanks for having me on.
It's such a pleasure. I asked Tod to join us because I love the way that he supports business owners in selling their business, and the way that he thinks about not only supporting them on the sell side, but also helping support the buyer in getting the right kind of financing, which he'll talk about through the SBA, to really help create that win for all parties. And listen, there are thousands and thousands of business owners out there today without a succession plan and a desire to find a buyer for their business to realize equity value. But the question is, are they primed to sell? And what Tod does really well, and I'm excited for him to share with us, is he helps sellers get in the best shape of their life, the best shape possible to make that transaction happen. And let's learn how he does this. And I think for many of you that are listening today, that at some point, this is crossing your consideration. And I want to give you as many tools as possible to make it happen. So Tod, what do you say? Let's rock and roll?
Sounds good.
Okay, let's start out with a couple of serious questions. Who was your favorite superhero, like cartoon superhero, when you were a kid?
It's got to say Spider-Man.
Yeah. Spider-Man.
Who doesn't want to swing between buildings down through the metropolitan area and, hang on the top of gargoyles? You just got to want to do that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. He had a great superpower. Okay, I got that. And what was like a cool car that you remember growing up? You're like, oh man, that's a sweet car. I'd love to have that car.
My dad, I grew up in Alaska, and in Juneau, they used to bring all of the state police cars back into Juneau to sell at auction. And my dad was real frugal. And so he'd buy these Crown Vics with 440 interceptors in them and spotlights. And so I always thought I had the coolest car because I'd pull up to the parties with this spotlight and police cars, and everybody would just, scatter.
Run. Right.
So I wasn't, that was all I knew. And so I thought those were the coolest cars.
That is great. I had no idea where that answer was going to go. I'm so happy. That's awesome. Good. Well, listen, let's dive in. Why did you get involved in this area of business brokerage? What was it that was appealing to you where you thought you could apply your skills and capabilities to help business owners?
I was asked to do this. I actually didn't go searching. I was working for a company called MAP, which is a CEO consultant that helps CEOs understand where the transition is from becoming a tactical founder to a strategic CEO. And we'd take those folks offsite for a couple of weeks and train them how to be a management consultant in their own company and become that strategic CEO. And in that process, I met a lot of people who owned businesses who really felt like they were at the end of their rope and they didn't want to become strategic CEOs. They're serial entrepreneurs. They wanted to go start something else and they wanted to sell their business. And so I was referring them to the gentleman who started Transition 360, Bill Pearsall. And eventually he reached a point where he said about 15 years ago, I've got to have my own transition and you're a fit. And so I partnered with Dan Stone at Stone Consulting, who had been a management consultant for years and was an exit strategy executive and certified. And so we got together and built the company from there about 15 years ago, based on Bill kind of approaching us and saying, hey, you guys are doing all of this except the actual transaction, tying the bow with the bank. And really, it wasn't that much different. A lot of times when you're doing management consulting, it's the same advice you're giving someone for the transition, but they have a light at the end of the tunnel, this financial transaction that's going to happen. And so they actually take your advice and they go do it. And as a management consultant, I found myself giving people a lot of good advice, but they wouldn't actually implement themselves. And as an M&A professional, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and so they actually go do it. So it's very rewarding if it's presented right and they actually go do it. And so that was the transition.
Tell me about Transition 360, the company. There are a lot of brokers out there that do like sell side brokerage for businesses. What is it about your business that's unique? How do you work? Share a little bit of background.
Yeah, there are a lot of brokerages out there, and they're divided into, I would say, 4 different tiers. There are the super large brokers, the big 4 accounting firms, and then right below them are kind of the investment banks. And then there's a small space of lower middle market, which is kind of where we're in. And then there's the Main Street brokers. And most of the brokers are in the Main Street brokerage space. They're selling restaurants and laundromats and all the walk-in stores. The space we're in is a little bit bigger, and it's the businesses that have become successful and they've been running well. And they're typically doing between $1 million and $30 million. Their market value might be up to maybe 20 million. They're not quite big enough for the investment banks to spend time on because they're not ready to go to market. They're typically baby boomers who've been running the company 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and they're successful, but they haven't been thinking about selling. And so there's a lot of work, typically, a lot of prep to do. And the big firms are willing to do that for larger paydays, for big transactions, but they're not willing to spend that kind of time on smaller companies. Smaller, I say, between 5 and 20, 30 employees typically. And that's what we do, is we take a large firm M&A perspective on how we can help a business owner, but we do it with the smaller businesses, which honestly is 95% of the businesses out there. I think it's 98% of the companies in America are under $10 million, and 96% of them are under 5 million. Mm-hmm. So America is made up of small businesses, and we have some qualifications. A company has to be profitable. It has to be in an industry with a future. It has to be transparent, and the owner has to be coachable. And so we only work with companies that meet qualifications, but there's so many of them in this area that we work that it's a great fit. And so our secret sauce is to work with a business owner to help them understand how a buyer is going to look at their company. And once they adopt that perspective and start looking at their company differently, they recognize all sorts of things that are low-hanging fruit that they could change that would modify their valuation. Mm-hmm. So we help them understand the methodologies that the buyer will be using on their company. And once they understand where the levers and the buttons are to change that methodology, then they can actually integrate that into their strategic plan and change value versus just growing revenue.
It's such significant value that you provide as a coach, as a guide. And even if a prospective client meets your criteria, they may not be, the distance between where they are today and actually going to market may be quite a bit of time, I imagine, because they've got work to do. So how do you engage with them during that period of time when they're not transaction ready?
Yeah, good question. It's going to vary for every company. I think 20 years ago, we had a lot of companies that were far from ready to sell. Manufacturers, particularly some aerospace, this area has a lot of companies that, because we were a port city, we were kind of built around that. There are a lot of 60, 70, 80-year-olds who own very profitable companies, who have never thought about selling their company and really don't want to think about it, because building a succession plan or a transition plan is kind of like doing your will. You have to think about dying or not being
Mm.
the owner of your company, which for somebody who's been running their company for 40 years is kind of like dying. If I'm not the CEO of my company, who am I? Right. And so I don't want to do a succession plan. I don't even want to think about that. And so the process really of getting them started around that used to be a lot harder. Nowadays we're meeting more and more people who are more prepared.
Hmm.
So our model is a long-term model. Typically we like to work with someone through 2 tax cycles, because financing is much easier if tax returns are filed with a selling perspective in mind versus a lifestyle perspective. And so it used to be that we got a lot more value with each tax return we could work through with someone. Now, more and more people are coming better and better prepared. There are folks who are working with companies like Stride, who are taking over that back end and getting it really well oiled. And those systems and processes that Stride puts in place are so valuable to a buyer, because it eliminates a lot of risk for them. They know that things have been looked through. They know it's transferable. They know it can be run as a larger company versus just potentially a bookkeeper who's been there for 20 years, who's maybe a family member. Totally different game. So as we teach somebody to look at the company like a buyer, they grow their perspective about different areas of risk within their business and how to eliminate that risk, so a buyer doesn't deduct so much based on different things.
Let me level up with a question that I want to dig back down in the details. The level up question is, what is happening in the macro environment today that is driving the velocity of more small business exits? And is that a story? Maybe that's a story I'm making up, or is it a fact that just the baby boom generation and the need to succession plan is keeping you really busy? What's happening at a big picture?
Well, that's exactly what it is. It's the baby boomers.
Okay.
It's pure numbers, Russell. It's pure numbers. We have so many baby boomers and so few qualified Gen Xers that really there's these mergers that are taking place where we're bringing multiple companies under the same roof for one buyer. And
Hmm.
there's just not enough Gen Xers who want to own and run companies, who are willing to take the risk that the baby boomers did in their age to take over these companies. There's really 2 types of entrepreneurs. There's folks who will run up their credit cards, spend all their cash, sleep in their car, and make a go at it. These are founders. These are pure entrepreneurs. And then there's re-entrepreneurs who are much less risk tolerant, and they're willing to buy something, but it's got to be a business model. It's got to produce cash flow. It's got to replace what they're making over at Google or Microsoft or Amazon. And so today I have a lot of what I call financial buyers who are interested in buying companies that they can take the processes and systems that they learned over at Starbucks and implement them at this little manufacturing plant and take it to the next level. And there's a lot of unhappy people working in cubicles at large companies in this city. And that's influencing how our little microcosm in, Seattle, this little Camelot where we live, is changing. And so the combination of the number of baby boomers who own businesses, the real wealth in numbers of small business in this area. We don't have a lot of big businesses. It's just a reality. There's only a handful of public companies in Seattle. The rest are small, mid-sized companies, and that's
Hmm.
that's why that's why we're in such a great position here in Seattle, is that the economy just keeps chugging along because we've got a diverse number of industries running this city, and that's it's not like this everywhere in the country, but here the dynamics of the number of baby boomers, the number of unhappy financial buyers who have a lot of cash, they have 401ks they can spend on business if they want, and as long as you can find a bank, which is kind of the tough spot today, that wants to lend, then you can make a deal. And there's a lot of creative solutions out there. So I think you're spot on. Things are looking up. I think it's 10,000 baby boomers a day are retiring right now or more, and
Hmm.
the numbers have never been like this. And that business ownership niche is right there with the baby boomers.
What would you say when you mentioned having a tax return that's built to sell versus a tax return that embeds a lot of your lifestyle expenses in there? What are the top 3 to 5 recommendations that you make to prospective business sellers on how to be better seller ready from a financial picture standpoint?
Well, Russell, I am not a CPA. Disclaimer.
Noted.
You are the expert there. Honestly, I would refer people to you there, but I would maybe step back and take a broader approach to that question. And I would say, let's put you in a buyer's seat. Okay, let's walk outside of your company and let's look at this company as if you were going to buy it. And what can we do to influence that tax return that's going to make it look better to the bank? Maybe a bank who's only going to look at your bottom line and a multiple of that bottom line. And what are you expensing right now versus maybe dropping that money to the bottom line? Because you save 35 cents on every dollar for what you drop to the bottom line. But what if we're able to get a 5x multiple for your company? That means that dollar would have been worth $5 instead of 35 cents saving. And so can we drop that to the bottom line on the returns? Okay, that's just one little aspect of the financial picture. But if we step back and we're still outside the front door looking at your business from a buyer's perspective and the risk, which really drives the multiple, then let's just compare a couple companies for a second. Because a CPA, if you ask them what's the multiple for this company, they're going to say, oh, well, you're in distribution. That's a 2.5x multiple without even looking at anything. And so I'm going to say, maybe that's not how a buyer looks at things. A buyer is going to look at the company. Let's say there's 2 companies. They're both doing $10 million in revenue. And they're both dropping $1 million in EBITDA to the bottom line. That's all the CPA looks at typically. And they're going to say, oh, that's a $2.5 million company if it's a 2.5x. And a buyer, on the other hand, is going to come in and look at both companies and say, I understand that financial perspective. But one company, it looks like they own the building. The other company, they're leasing it. And in fact, the lease is over next month and they're destroying this whole block and building something else. So I would have to move this building. And wow, that first company, they've got a professional executive team running this. And the second company, it looks like all family members in there running that company. Oh my gosh, that's a little bit of a risk potentially. But let's look over here at concentration of vendors and suppliers. This company has got 20 different vendors and suppliers. This company over here has 1. Okay, this company, their customer concentration, they've got 1,000 customers. This company's doing the same revenue, but only 10 customers. A little bit of a risk. This company's got processes and systems. They've got Stride behind them. They've got all sorts of paperless systems in place. This company's got a file cabinet room that we've got to go through. Now, are these 2 companies both worth the same amount? No. And so if you get a business owner to look at their company from that perspective, now they can start making changes, both on the tax return and the P&L and the balance sheet, as well as their physical assets and how they run their business. So that's what we partner with them along with their CPA, their attorney, their financial manager, their wealth manager. You got to get the rest of the professional service team involved and synchronize everyone and start thinking together and brainstorming together about how to help this person. And then you come out with a plan. So preparation, like everything, is the key to this. If you've done all the preparation and you have all the due diligence that the buyer's bank and the buyer's attorney are going to want, and you've got it all on a thumb drive that you can just hand them, you know what? These buyers have looked at a dozen companies before they look at the one you present to them, and they're blown away if they don't have to spend 6 months doing due diligence, and you can hand them all the documents they're going to need for due diligence without them spending much energy at all. And they will pay more for that company. And they
100%.
if I can save 6 months of my time, I'll pay another $500,000 for this company because it's ready to go. It's turnkey. It's been vetted. It's transparent. There's no liens. There's no lawsuits. They've got an executive team. The owner's got a succession plan. He's ready to run. And, it's a different model. And so we have a lot of buyers who will buy almost any company, or they certainly want to look at any company we bring to market, because it doesn't matter so much the industry. If the cash flow's there and it's transparent and I can present everything to them,
They can trust it.
They're building a portfolio and they trust us, then, there's plenty of money out there. Lots of dry, not a whole lot ready to transition.
Perfect. It's just a perfect response, like super actionable. Put yourself in the feet of the buyer and look at your business with that critical eye. We've talked about financing, dry powder, banks a number of times. Share with me another element of your secret sauce, or at least I think of it as your secret sauce, where you really help marry the business opportunity, the acquisition opportunity with the source of financing, meaning you know so well what the SBA, which is a fairly effective source of financing, is likely going to lend against this purchase, that you can help create a financing structure in support of both the seller's goals and the buyer's goals. Can you talk a little bit about how you interface with the SBA or the SBA as a source of financing?
Yeah, the SBA is a great source of financing. Number one reason, they eliminate risk. Okay, from a seller's perspective, what's the number one risk? Not getting your money. So an SBA will divvy up a loan. Basically, they will cover 75% of the purchase price. So if I'm selling a $10 million company, the SBA maxes out at 5 million in most cases for the business. Depends on if you're doing 504 and 7A. If there's real estate involved, it's certainly larger.
Okay.
But they will bring 75% of the purchase price in cash when you sell it. And then they expect the buyer to bring around 10 to 15% to the table. So now you're at 85, 90% cash at closing for your company. That eliminates a lot of risk versus a conventional loan where maybe you're getting half in cash and the rest in earnout or escrow or down the road. So that's why we love these, is because the seller walks away with most of the cash. The other 10% is paid out over 5 years, and you can usually count on that, but it's gravy. Right. So the SBA is just a great system. There's not a lot of other cash flow lenders out there, and the federal government recognizes that. And that's why the SBA is there, is that it's not an asset based. I mean, it is, but it's not like a conventional loan. You do have to sell your kidney to qualify for an SBA loan, but they will lend on cash flow businesses. And there's a lot of those out there in this small to mid-sized market. In the professional service industry, we sell CPA firms and law firms. These are cash flow business, right? Your assets are your people. When they walk out your door, there they go.
Yeah.
And so the SBA is perfect for a lot of these industries that are cash flow, and it eliminates a lot of risk. There are conventional loans that you can layer on top of these SBAs if you have larger transactions. And so there are certain banks out there with different appetites, and we do know which banks have appetites for what. We have relationships with all the best SBA lenders in town. And honestly, it doesn't matter what bank that SBA lender works for. If they know how to get through the SBA at the federal government level, that's the lender you want to work with. It's the SBA officer more than the bank. That's important in that situation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Tell me about how you ultimately generate revenue at Transition 360. When do you get paid?
At the end. So we're a fee for success model. So if we're not successful, then there's no reason to pay us. Our goal is to partner with a business owner and implement their goals. And so up front, there's a ton of education involved. And so we only work with people we trust, and we try to weed them out early on by not so much having a contract, just having a handshake with someone that we're here to help you. We're happy to kind of be on your board over the next few years as you make decisions and advise you what we think you should do to increase value. And then once we get close to maybe taking the company to market and we like them and they like us, then we sign kind of a contractual obligation as we go to market and start spending real money to help them. But we charge 10% on the back end of the transaction. The only other thing we charge for is a valuation. So when we engage with somebody up front, we used to do valuations for the banks, these SBA valuations. They'd call us as a third party,
Yeah.
a party to do valuations. So we know all the methodologies that the bank's third party is going to do that for that valuation to qualify. Once there's actually a purchase and sale agreement in place and a deal is going to be done, and the bank says, okay, well, we better have our own valuation done to make sure we want to lend this much money. So we know how to do those. So why wouldn't you just do that up front so that the seller has realistic expectations of what the bank is going to tell them it's going to be worth on the back end? I mean, don't without realistic expectations. Now, I'm not saying that the number won't be different by the time you get to market, but up front, let's find out, what's the range that the bank is going to look at as far as value for your company right now in the case that this goes in SBA. And so we do those valuations up front. We charge $5,000 for that, and it's credited against our commission at the end when we sell it. So we are truly a fee for success company. And we have a company that we sold last year. We worked for 6 years.
Wow.
You know how many hundreds and maybe thousands of hours we put into that. But the reality was, we more than doubled the value of that company from the time we started working with them till the time so that seller was
aligned. Interests are aligned.
And 30-40% of our clients come from referrals from clients who sold their companies. And so that's great cyclical system. It's why we do. The other 20-30% come from CPAs and attorneys who were part of the deal.
Yeah.
Who want their other clients to be treated the same way.
It's a great ecosystem that you've built. Is that ecosystem primarily limited to the Pacific Northwest, or do you work with sellers outside of the region?
Mostly the Pacific Northwest. We like to see people face to face. And so if somebody is willing to fly here and sit down and work with us, we'll sell businesses beyond that. We have international buyers. The buyers come from all over the world, but most of the we're selling, probably 75% of them are in kind of a 7-state region. I'd say 50% at least in the Washington area.
What is something that people would find surprising about what it takes to operate a business like Transition 360 so successfully?
I think like any professional service, if you really want to do a good job, you have to be a good listener and you have to be patient with people. And there's a lot of emotion in selling businesses. This is probably the largest transaction of a person's life. Yeah. Most of our clients are baby boomers. So they're 60, 70, 80. They've owned the company for 20, 30 years. Very profitable company. They just are tired. They want to sell their company. They don't want to go through another cycle. They don't want to hire a bunch of more people. They've been putting $500,000 in their pocket. They're happy with what they're making. They don't want to grow it. And so they're at a point where they've been happy for a long time and they're not necessarily emotionally prepared to sell their company when they decide to put it on the market. And so the communication and the friendships that I build with clients to help them emotionally prepare for a day when an offer actually lands on the table and they have to seriously consider the reality that they might not be the CEO of this company of 30, 40 people that they've known all their lives. And who is going to call them tomorrow to ask them how to engineer this or advice on this? Who's going to give them any love, And they have to seriously, emotionally kind of swallow that and say, you know what, it's okay. I'm still going to sign this. I'm going to sell the company. And so the process of trying to marry a legacy of this seller who founded this company on blood, sweat, and tears and have them know that it's okay to move on to the next chapter and that although they won't financially or from a leadership perspective, be connected with that company, it's still going to be out there, and their picture will still be on the website as the founder, and that there will still be some legacy connection, but helping them to dream about what the next chapter is and what they're going to do next. And some folks are ready for that and they've been prepared, but the majority aren't. The majority of the men who, honestly, the men who own these companies, this is who they are. It's not what they do. This is who they are. And so
Identity.
the emotional side and talking people through this process is something that when you're outside of this industry, you think about the transaction, the financial transaction, but you don't really think about coaching people through that transition of life to the second half of what they're going to do next.
Very emotional.
It's really rewarding, honestly, for me, because
Sure.
I've built some great friendships with people who are just loving life now, traveling all over the world. Honestly, it's hard to get a hold of people after they sell their businesses.
Hey, yeah, we don't talk anymore. We don't talk anymore.
Yeah, it's good though.
This is so good, Tod. One last question for you. What is something that people don't usually ask you, but you wish they did? You wish they were more curious about this area of your business?
I think that when people ask me, well, when should I start planning for an exit? When should I start thinking about this? I'm like, you haven't already started? So if you start or own a business, you should be thinking about selling it, whether you ever sell it or not. The process of thinking about selling your business, you know what it's going to do? It's only going to make you more profitable, no matter whether you sell it or not. It's just a good process. And so if you're not doing a annual strategic plan, you should be. And whatever your planning is, you should have a line item on that strategic plan that you ask every year. And that should be, what is our exit strategy? And who's helping us with that? If it's just in your head, if it's not on paper, if you've talked with your CPA or your attorney about it, but you haven't really put a plan together, then you should. That's the best advice I can give you, is put that line item on your strategic plan. So at least it's part of the discussion every year, and bring it up with your professional service advisors and start planning for it, because your business will be worth 2 or 3 times as much by the time you sell it. And we worked with a company recently that had multiple products. In fact, it's kind of interesting. They were building a furnace that operates in a vacuum that will melt any element of metal and subliminate it into a steam so that it forms a film on a mirror inside this vacuum. And they had nanotechnology to create a pedestal that holds a single cell so you can see the whole cell. And they had a sphere that was full of gases that would allow them to test a laser for an atomic explosion without having to do it. And they had a Mad Hatter running all this. And we worked with them for 3 years. We tripled the value of the company, and we helped them find a buyer who was interested in all 3 products instead of having to sell the company. So there were a lot of little things we did over a couple of years, and just a complete success, because he couldn't think about how to go about sharing the value of the company. He was a NASA engineer, and all he wanted to do was invent. And when people came in, they thought, how is this company ever going to run without this guy? And so there was a process. So at Transition 360, we have a process, and it's there's some IP around it. And you just start knocking off all the risks that a business will have in a buyer's mind. And when you've eliminated all that and the buyer looks at it, there's no reason for them to discount the business, even if you have a high multiple, because you've gone through all the deal killers. And
yeah, you're not going to find any skeletons, right? You're not going to find any skeletons. And I love your comment. Hey, even if you're not going to sell your business, think about it as if you are. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're going to be more profitable. You're going to generate more cash flow. You're going to have more durable systems. You're going to be able to work on your business and not as much in your business. It's just a great orientation that I am going to bring to every one of our clients. So thank you for that.
Well, I know you already do it, Russell. You guys, and Stride has got processes in place as far as aligning that back end so that it is transferable and it's turnkey and it's transparent. And that is extremely helpful. That's the biggest deal killer, is when snakes come out of the file cabinet that, sometimes even the seller didn't know about because they hadn't had anyone else look at it. And
yeah.
so
And I think it's,
valuable.
yeah. And I think it's contextualizing it like, hey, why does this matter? Why is it important? It's not just what we do, it's a why we're doing it. And so you've really helped bring a level of vista to looking at why this is so purposeful, not this year, not today, but for what you want to develop for your strategy over the next several years. Let's start now. I love it. I love it. Tod, thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Stride to Freedom.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's so great. Understanding how to prepare a company for a new owner and maximize value is actually pretty opaque to most business owners. And you helped us get clear on what owners can do, when, and how to do it. And so I'm hopeful that there are some listeners today that want to talk more with you specifically, which I will make your information available in the show notes, and learn about how you might be able to support them so long as they meet your criterion filter for working with them. Thank you, Tod, for supporting our community. Have a great week, everyone. I'm Russell Benaroya. See you all on the next episode of Stride to Freedom. Thanks, Tod.
Thanks, Russell.
Have a good one.